Hey guys, what's cracking? Godsman here, coming at you with a Bavsargra deck profile post set 7. That's right, set 7. So that means I'm going to be using some proxies, not just for the set 7 cards, but also for a lot of the cards, because I'm only now building this deck IRL, and it's going to take a process, because for those of you who know, Bavsargra is a bit of a pricey deck, especially with the Festival Collection card, so that's going to have to come in due time. However, nothing the power of proxies can't save, right? So a little bit of context, I haven't been playing Standard all that much the past, I'd say 3 or so sets. I had done it near the beginning, but then dropped off for a while. So now we're back in action, and oh boy, Standard has become a really fun format to play. And one of the funnest decks is Bavsargra. It's an amazing deck that surprised me with how intricate it was and how well you're rewarded for skillful play compared to a lot of Standard decks in the format right now. So let's go ahead and get right into the deck profile. Alright, so first off, we've got the obvious bit, which is the ride line. No questions here. The ride line is, of course, your grade 0, your grade 1, your grade 2, and your grade 3. So I expect a lot of people to already know what this ride line is, but I'll go over it briefly just for the sake of completion. So, of course, Arhinsa, this is your starter, roll upon 1 second, draw a card. This one is required, actually, because your grade 1 specifically is going to ask to ride over it, so don't be funny and do Trickstar or something. Grade 1 is Namorkahr, so when he's placed on the Vanguard by riding over the aforementioned Arhinsa, you Soul Blast 1. Remember the Soul Blast, it's an important cost. You do that in order to add either your sword and your shield. So you've got this guy right here or that guy. Quick note about that, you should 9 times out of 10 be grabbing the shield because it is very much the better armed card, but if you already have it in your hand because, you know, drawing is a thing, then sword is just fine. But more on the armed cards later. Then we move on to the grade 2. So the grade 2, Halibadra has the skill that when it's placed on Van Circle from riding on Namorkahr, then you're able to add a weapon from the drop back to the hand. So it's a very simple thing. You add the weapon on the grade 1 turn, then on the grade 2 turn, you ditch it for the ride, and then just add it right back. So it's as if you got a free ride. Lovely. And then of course, Bavsargra herself. So Bavsargra is the grade 3 of the ride line. It's the only grade 3 that you're going to be riding in this deck, and of course we've got 3 Persona copies with it. So what's up with Bavsargra? Well, Bavsargra is a very unique card. I don't really think there's a card like it in this game. For those of you who play Yu-Gi-Oh, you could liken it to something like Noble Knights, but it's still very different. So she has 2 skills. The first one being that whenever she's armed, we'll go over that in a bit, you Soul Charge 1, and then you can choose a grade 1 or less card from your drop and call it. Note, because this doesn't outline a cost, when she's armed, if she hasn't been armed that turn, since it's the once per turn skill, if she's been armed, you have to do it. That can be pretty annoying, so watch out if you're low on deck for the soul charge, or if you like your formation and you have to replace something with the crappy grade 0. So watch out, that is mandatory. The second effect, however, isn't mandatory, but it's still really good. So as long as she's been armed with 2 or more cards, you Soul Blast 2 in order to retire your opponent's entire front row and give her a crit. This skill is definitely pretty threatening. Now, oftentimes the retire of the front row, it's something that the opponent will be aware of. That's what they're going to be looking out for, so they'll try to play around as much as possible. So don't feel disheartened if they only leave you like 1 rear guard in the front row or something. Just go ahead and do it for the crit. The crit is really good because, as we'll go into later, Bavsargra hits very big numbers, so she becomes a very pressuring type of Vanguard. And this is a Vanguard-centric deck, so you're going to be giving her all these Nidoking kind of things to just go ahead and either kill the opponent or stay alive in the match. But although there is a lot more to talk about her, I think we should just move on with the deck profile and discuss more of her implications when it comes up with particular interactions with the cards, because there are a lot of interactions. So next up, let's go over the weapons. So straight away, we've got 4 of the, just by far and away, the best weapon in this entire deck, excluding maybe the shield, which is Spear. So yeah, what does Spear do? You counterblast 1 when you play it in order to draw a card, and then you get the ability to arm another card. Now, for players who don't know, generally speaking, you can only play an order once per turn. This is also the same thing with an arm card. Usually you can only play it once per turn unless you do some other sort of effect to try and bypass that. This is that kind of an effect. And by arming 2 cards, you're allowing yourself to not only give Bavsargra more effects, but that means that her ability to retire 2 and get a crit is live as soon as your grade 3 turn. So your first grade 3 turn, you can just already swing with a crit, and that can be pretty devastating because of course if the opponent is on grade 2 especially, then holy crap, that's going to be kind of threatening to guard. Even if they're on grade 3, then you just have a good tempo swing to keep up in the match. So yeah, Spear at 4 is pretty much mandatory. As you're arming cards from the drop, you have a couple means of doing so in this deck. Arming Spear with Spear just gives you this consistent draw engine. And on top of that, Spear does grant 10k power to your Vanguard during your turn. So that means that Bavsargra at base without any other boosting is already 23. So again, this is just another element of the attack power gain that she's going to be getting as you're just combining all of your effects, the elements of your deck. So, okay. Next up, we've got 2 copies of Sword along with 1 copy of the Shield. The Shield and the Sword are the 2 that Bavsargra came with, right? So, of course, they're pretty iconic. People understand basically what they do. You Soul Blast 1 for this, and you Counter Blast 1 for this to arm them. And with the Sword, you're able to grant 10k to Bavs, but on top of that, you also give her the skill to Counter Blast 2 and get rid of the Sword to deal the opponent a damage to that 4 or less. So it's like the Mortared Phantom type effect. I liken it to her just throwing the Sword at the opponent and it just breaks on contact. It's a pretty funny interaction to think about, but it's definitely good for pressure because, as you'll come to find out, Counter Blast is a weird situation in this deck. You either have too much of it or not enough of it. So you have to be able to manage it very carefully. But if you're in the former situation and you've got a lot of it to go through, Counterblasting 2 to deal them damage is a great way to keep tempo in the game. In this deck, even though it has a lot of emphasis on consistency and revival and being able to get resources, it is still an aggressive deck in its own right. And I think the real crux of being able to do well with this deck is knowing how to pressure the opponent as much as you can. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have Shield. So just as a Shield would imply, it's a defensive card. Once a turn, when your armed unit is attacked, aka Bavsargra, since she's the one who can be armed, you get 10k to her until the end of that battle. So it's as if you have given her an extra 10k shield per battle per turn. Now it's only for 1 battle that turn, but it really adds up. This shield cannot be understated. The only reason why you run 1 copy is because you can just literally search in the deck. You either drew it or you added it with the ride line effect that you will always get. So you may be asking, why 2 sword? Well, the reason for 2 sword is there are a couple reasons. For one thing, I tried out gun. Gun sucks. Don't run gun. A lot of people like to run gun and be cute about it, but I think they'll have to like sort of ashamedly agree that 9 times, hell, even 19 times out of 10, they're not using this goddamn effect, right? So if they're not using gun, then why run gun? We can just run another sword, because I never want to replace shield as the right deity arms. You can only put right deity arms on the right side, right? Now, or I guess technically it's the left deity arms, but you know, perspective is weird. But on this deity arms, you can replace spear with sword. They both give 10k with their effects, so they're virtually the same. It's just that spear allows you to set up by getting more draw power. But if you're already set up, then this offensive skill is essentially the same, and you just get the nice little benefit if you want to aggress the opponent more. On top of that, there have been a couple times where I have actually opened both of these cards. So by having a third target from the deck, your right line skill can still activate, and that is about as important as you'd imagine. So yeah, get as much advantage as you can. And that would be the arm cards. So now we're moving on to the only other grade 3 in the deck. Yeah, this deck does run a fair bit of grade 3s, so watch out about guarding. We've got 3 copies of Adarla. So Adarla has 2 skills. The first one being that when he's placed on the rear circle, if your Vanguard circle has 1 arm card, remember, this is 1 arm specifically, not 0, not 2, 1. You counterblast 1 to choose an arm card from the hand or drop and arm it to your Vanguard. This is one of those means of cheating out another arm card on the grade 3 turn, as I was saying before. And yeah, that's about as good as you would imagine. I'm only running him at 3 though, because we have another means of doing that now. Plus, running too many grade 3s in this deck does hurt your ability to guard, and so I had to limit him to 3 for the time being. He still comes up plenty at 3 though. As a matter of fact, I think he may come up a little bit too much, but the thing that's keeping him from being a brick is his second effect, which is that continuous on the rear. As long as you've got 2 arms on your Vanguard, he gets 5k. That's good. He's an 18k attacker. That is about as good as you freaking imagine. On a Persona Right, that's a 28k attack. That's already asking for 20 shield, which is really annoying for the opponent to deal with. That's usually going to be 2 card guard unless they've got those front triggers. So yeah, Adarla is just a staple piece of the deck. I think that the counterblast can hurt you a bit, so there's going to be another card later on that has this sort of effect, and I like that card better. But if you don't have it, then this is a good fallback plan. Adarla is a pretty good boy. Alright. So now we're moving on to the grade 2s. There's not a lot of them, but we do have 4 copies of Sealed Blaze Dragon Aaushniya. So Aaushniya, this guy is the Festival Collection card, aka the really expensive one that you still have to run at 4 of because they love to make staples expensive for some indiscernible reason. What does Aaushniya do? So it's one effect. When he's placed on the rear, you counterblast 1 to give him 10k power and also revive a grade more or less from the drop, but it's based on the deity arms you have. So yeah, that's something really important to note. If you've got only 1 deity arm, you only get 1 effect. So the right deity arm allows you to get the 10k, whereas it's the left deity arm that lets you get the revival. So if push comes to shove and you only have 1, you may not use it unless you really desire either the power boost or the revive, and surprisingly both of these are about equivalent in terms of their benefit. You would think the revive is really cool, and yes, it is really cool, but you may have a full board, or you may also find yourself in those situations where you don't have that great of a target to revive from the drop zone. So in those situations you start to realize, oh, it's more just here to be a 20k beater, and that may be like kind of sucky to, CB1 for 10k, but you need to pressure as much as you can. So that is actually surprisingly worth it, especially if you couple it with the revival. So yeah, for Aaushniya, he's basically your premier grade 2 of the deck. There's not really any other grade 2 that is a staple the way that Aaushniya is. Alright, we're running one other grade 2, and it's at 2 copies, and this one's a bit more of a recent include for me personally, and that is Travis. So yeah, this is the sort of out of theme element of the deck. Everything else is basically in theme, but this is the one weird guy in the room. So what does Travis do? He's got 1 skill. So it's an axe skill where if your opponent's rearguard has been retired this turn, aka you use Bavsargra, then you're able to counterblast 1, another CB, in order to soul charge 1, retire one of your opponent's units, any of them, not the front row, and get 10k. Wow, there's a lot going on there. So yeah, it's another retire, which is really sick. Field control has always been one of the stronger parts of this like standard format, if you ask me, but that's just my personal opinion. The real benefit, I feel, is the 10k and the soul charge. Of course, the 10k gives you more of a pressure game, and the name of the game is pressure. I can't stress that enough. But let's talk about soul charge. See, one of the weaknesses, as it is, for Bavsargra is that her ability is a soul charge 2. Now, her effect can soul charge 1, but that means you're having a deficit of 1 soul. If nothing is fueling your soul after a while, you're going to run out of this ability to give her that crit and do the front row wipe. How do you get around that? Well, you use Travis's skill, because now, as long as you constantly arm Bavsargra, you can achieve this loop where you're always giving her the soul charge 2 for the soul blast 2, so she's always getting the crit, and you're always able to retire the front row plus another rear guard. That is crazy. One of the only ways to stop this loop is for the opponent to not have any front row out there, but that means they either invested nothing to the front row, which means they didn't pressure you very much, or they had 2 cards that got rid of themselves from the front row, which is not likely at all. I mean, I've seen a lot that were like one like Inlet Pulse or whatever, but usually they will have something in the front row if they wanted to at least do a decent offense on you. So that much is a given. Travis is not a sort of staple of the deck, if you will. There's other things you can do. Shirgo is another good option to put here. You could even run more grade 1s, such as Samsara, if you wanted to really emphasize Bavsargra's skill and make it super consistent. But I still think Travis is just really good for that soul charge and the extra 10k, because soul is a struggle. Alright, now we're moving on to the grade 1s. So I'll just put it right out here. We've got 3 regular PG along with 1 Elementatia Sanctitude. Yeah, no questions asked. This is just what you run. I don't need to explain what the PG does. And Elementatia Sanctitude, I guess I'll just say it for the audience that it's an order, so there's some benefits for being a Sentinel order. He gets around most guard restricts, that's the main benefit, but also it does have the ability to not discard a card if the opponent's Vanguard has triple drive, so it's good against grade 4 matchups. It's just all around so worth it as the one-of copy that it's mandated to be at, so I just don't see much of an argument for not running it these days. You'd have to really have a deck that does not like orders, or I don't know, maybe you have low hand size at all times, so you really want to emphasize that skill. But unless you're playing like, I don't know, Brave or something, then I don't see the point. And guess what? Brave's not in D standard. Okay, so there is a grade 1 here that is the only grade 1 of this deck other than the PGs, but it's so important and it's very loopable, so it's all we need. So yeah, say hi to Samadhi. So Samadhi is the new grade 1 we got for set 7, and holy crap, they really gave it something good here. So the continuous effect is that as long as your Vanguard has 2 DD arms, a lot like Adarla, it gets 5k power. So it's a 13k attacker / booster. That's really nice. But then it goes further. If your Vanguard here, let me rephrase this. You retire this in order to arm a card from your hand or your drop. That right there, yes, it is technically a neg1, although with Spear it becomes a net 0, but you didn't CB for it. And here's the beauty of this skill. By doing this skill to retire it in order to arm a card, Bob Saga then triggers to Soul Charge, and then you can revive a grade 1. So what you've got here is every turn you have another loop. This loop is every turn you cycle through an arm card, so if you have one on the field and then one in the drop, you just constantly retire it in order to re-equip it. She brings it back, and as long as they don't get rid of it, then boom, you can keep on doing this turn after turn after turn after turn. It's another great way to keep your engine rolling, so yeah, he's really good. Why does he only have 3 copies though? Well, deck space is very tight in this deck, and on top of that, as long as you see 1 copy, you're golden. You only need the 1 copy because you can just keep on bringing it back. If not with Bob's, then also with Aaushniya. So yeah, Samadhi is one of the cornerstones of this deck. I love him so much, and he's basically a better Adarla in my opinion. Alright. Now we're moving on to the grade 0s, and surprise surprise, we've actually got a grade 0 that isn't a trigger here and not the starter, and that's 4 copies of Trick Moon, aka probably the MVP of this entire freaking deck. Trick Moon is a phenomenal card. I really underestimated this dude at first, and I didn't realize how important he was going to be to this deck. Let's explain him. So when he's placed on your back row center rear circle from drop zone, yes, it is that specific, and it's so specific because it's basically telling you play this in Bavsargra. You can Nirvana, don't do it. Please, love yourself. But if you achieve this condition, then you countercharge 1 for free. Yes, it is just a straight up countercharge. So for all these CB skills that you're doing, you do get this sort of recurrable countercharge here. Now, you have to find some way to get rid of it unless the opponent gets rid of it for you. Or what you can do is every turn, if you have 1 in the drop and 1 on the field, you can revive the 1 from the drop over the 1 on the field and keep on getting this countercharge, which can be a viable strategy if you just need CB for certain skills. So what's the other effect of Trick Moon? Well, here's his big effect. When he boosts, he has what's called the Dress Boost skill. It's the only card in the game that has Dress Boost. So the boosted unit is going to get 10,000 power for each card your Bob Saga is armed with. That's pretty good. That means that he's giving plus 20 on top of his 5k boost, so he's a 25k booster. And that's not just for Babs. That's for anything he's boosting. This is just an insane power boost, especially on a Persona ride, and especially when you're doing it behind Bavsargra as you customarily do. So what you've got here then is you've got the situation where Trick Moon is boosting Bavs, who's got a crit on top of the extra 10k, and here's your general power line. Without a Persona ride, you're looking at 48 with a crit. With Persona ride, it's 58 in a crit. That's ridiculous. That is big. That is so big that 9 times out of your 10, your opponent is either going to take it or PG it. They usually don't throw a lot of shields. The only times I've really seen the opponent shield it, unless they just had to throw a lot of their triggers out of desperation, they were going to die, and generally they lose the result anyway. The only time I've ever seen someone actually guard this without a PG and feel okay about it was when they guard their over trigger, which, yeah, that's a 50k shield and they'll do it, but it's also kind of oof to guard the over trigger. So, and even then, if you're guarding the over trigger, if you're on the Persona ride turn, that's still only a 1 to pass on their part. They'll probably want to throw in more to avoid the crit damage. So yeah, it's a really big threatening boost, and if you've got several of the Trick Moons, then what do you know? You get to use this effect several times. You get to just go ahead, swing with the Van, give it a big boost, and then on the rear, give it all the triggers, and then boom, another Trick Moon's gonna boost that, and that's gonna get plus 20k. It's just so crazy. And even if they get rid of it, guess what? Bavs can just revive it next turn, and then you can keep on going. It's just one of the cornerstones of the deck, and I'm really surprised they didn't give it to us in the trial deck, but I guess they really wanted to sell those boosters, didn't they? Alright, so now we're moving on to the rest of the Great Zeros, and yes, these are triggers. So let's state the obvious. Over trigger, Drag Veta, it's the Dragon Empire one. When you check it, you know, all the 100 million, remove it, yada yada, and you stand your Vanguard. I don't think I need to explain why you run this over trigger, but what I will say is it's really nice in Bavs because she's already swinging big with a crit. So because she's sort of guaranteed that crit as long as you keep on using that skill, restanding it with a crit could just mean ultra death for the opponent if it's got the 100 million on top of that. They will need to PG that mother effer. Alright, and then moving on from that, what other triggers do we got? Well, we're also running the 3 ofs. Boom, Flare Veil. So yeah, it's not really much else to explain. Flare Veil, it's just the effect draw. It gets 5k shield if the opponent's grade 3 or greater. And on top of that, we're running 4 copies of the effect crit along with 4 copies of the regular crit. I chose the trial deck one. And I am running 4 copies of regular heal. Again, the trial deck one, because why not? So yeah, why am I not running the heal guards? Well, why are you not running the heal guards? See, it's because, ooh, looks like I didn't get to have the right scenario for this heal. Looks like it's a 10k shield now. Yeah, seriously, I know there's like certain meta calls that come with the heal guards, but guys, I just need to say it straight up. It's not worth it. Just take the 15 shield and be okay with it. Because something that people don't understand, yes, you can look at those effects and say, oh, I can get 15k shield if the right circumstance comes up. But what they forget to do is critically analyze, is that 15 shield relevant when the circumstance comes out? I actually died in a game last night because I got greedy and saw, oh hey, Bastion can restand, so I can use the effect of the one that gets 15 if the unit had attacked you more times, and you know, just use that. Guess what? Bastion's like columns were too big anyway. It ended up being useless, and I wasted my PG on something I should have and died. That's the point. Even when they're technically live, they're not optimal. So I just don't like those heals. Don't bother with it. You're going to make your shield values weak, and it's super gimmicky. Maybe it comes up every once in a while, but nothing really beats just pure old 15. It's nothing like the V series heal guardians. Those are absolute staples. Alright, and that is the deck. So overall, what is there to say about this deck? Well, again, I said before, it's really fun, but it's also really intricate. It's not the kind of deck that you would go into thinking that this is going to be some super complicated thing. It seems pretty easy at first. You know, arm Bavs with the freaking arm cards and just go ham, right? You know, give her weapon, give her shield, revive card, But it's super complicated when you actually try to play it effectively. After all, when you just look at this from a more in-depth angle, you have certain cycles and loops to go through. Trick Moons, going over Trick Moons being one of them, being able to juggle the Samadhis, being able to have Travis help you out with the juggling as well, so on and so forth. There's a lot of ways to keep this engine going. And the real trick, it's sort of like Malkuth for any of the people who have played that version of Angel Feathers, where Malkuth has a really nice payoff, but you need to keep sustaining it by making the correct actions and understanding what your deck needs in that moment. If you don't, then it's all going to fall apart and you're going to feel like you're not really playing much of a deck anyway. But if you do play correctly, you do keep your soul charges up, you do keep your counter charges up, you make your columns big, you know when to get the crit, and you also know when to use your bigger skills, then you're playing an incredible deck. And also, who doesn't like Bavs? Waifu material, right? So, okay, that's going to be the deck list. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, criticisms, do let me know in the comment section down below. I plan to do more deck profiles such as this in the future. Probably going to give a fight night on this pretty soon here, in fact, so do look forward to that as well. And with that, take care, and God bless.